Welcome, everyone. We're super pumped today. This is our first episode of SeniorOpedia, the podcast. We're building SeniorOpedia to be the everything how-to guide for seniors and caregivers. Today's topic is going to be natural burials, also known as green burials. And I've got a very special guest from Smith's Funeral Home, Sarah Sunnucks, who is an expert in the topic. She is going to educate us about everything. Hi, Sarah.
Great,
How are
thanks.
you?
How are you today?
I'm doing great, thanks. Thanks for joining us. So we were talking a little while ago, a couple of weeks ago, and you brought up this topic about this natural burial stuff, which was brand new to me. I'd never heard of it. And I thought, wow, what a cool idea. So maybe you could explain a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, so in Canada, we have what we call natural burial available to families, and not every cemetery has it available. So it is kind of a unique thing. You do have to do some education and some research, which is kind of my primary job here at the funeral home. I want to make sure everyone has options, that they kind of look into them ahead of time so they can be well educated and make choices that reflect their morals and values and what they believe in. So there are 6 funeral cemeteries right now, which are considered hybrid cemeteries. So what that means is they have a section allotted for this natural burial process. The idea is that you go back to nature just the way you came. So there's nothing that's going to affect the ground. There's no kind of headstone. There's no kind of casket or outer container that's cement. It's kind of greenery and forestry, and wildflowers are going to grow after you're there. So it's kind of a unique opportunity.
So it's like a standard burial, except there's no elaborate casket, there's no formaldehyde, there's no embalming, those types of things. Is that?
That's right. So that's right.
Right
Yeah.
there?
So there's no kind of chemical preparation of the body. There's kind of a blanket that's placed on you. So instead of having like plastics in your clothing and all of that, it's kind of all natural. And then you go into the ground naturally. Here at Smith's, we have green caskets still. So it still looks like a casket, but it's all natural. No metals, no dyes, that sort of thing. Or we can do a wicker carrier or something that's going to just, naturally go back to the earth.
And what I found really cool when you were describing it, it made it sound like you just put the body right into the ground, you cover it all up, and really the nature takes its course, and the bugs and whatever else decompose the body, and it goes away very quickly. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
so it's actually buried a little bit higher in the ground. So we're trying to do a little bit higher than the frost level,
Mhm.
because that's where kind of the natural bacteria is living. That's supposed to be there. That helps, what's supposed to happen.
In the first so many
That's right.
feet.
That's right.
Yes.
So it is kind of, you're still buried about 4 feet down. So you're still protected in that way. The other thing
Mhm.
too is you're still in a cemetery. So you still have cemetery staff. There's still, gates to a lot of cemeteries. They're still protected in that way. It's in a cemetery. That's what the laws are right now. But it's supposed to be the most natural process that we can do. I kind of say it's kind of like 100 years ago when people didn't have all these things happening to them around funerals. It
Right.
was all natural. They wanted the body to basically do what it's supposed to do.
I was speaking to somebody yesterday about this topic, and they said, "Oh my goodness, 20 years ago in my little town in Poland where I came from, they never used to have all the big fancy cemetery type stuff. We used to just actually do it right from the home. And once somebody passes away, we have the sort of celebration of life, and the person is just covered up and put on the kitchen table, if you will, and the body's already starting to decompose, but you've got all these flowers and whatnot to help control the smell." And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. That was only 20 years ago. Now, they didn't do that in the big city, she said, but in the rural areas, that's how they did it.
Yeah, so actually the word parlor for funeral parlor, which is an older term, but it was because the parlor was where you
Mhm.
kept the body in your home. You kept it in the parlor. So that's kind of where that word came from. And over COVID,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
it's kind of a history lesson for you there, but over COVID,
There you go. You learned
yeah,
about that too.
we did have to kind of make some interesting moves to try to still serve families in a way that was appropriate. So we offered home visitations,
Mhm.
home funerals, where we had the person in the home. like I said, we have a green casket, so it's all natural wood. So we were able to provide things that reflected that person. The green burial that I did in our Grimsby location, she was a mushroom farmer. She did a lot of work with the Bruce Trail, and it just really reflected her life to have an all natural death. So that kind of, I said, we were talking with the family, and it's like her last wish was to give back to the earth instead of, adding to it.
Now, we're not really conditioned to that here in Canada or perhaps North America as much, but do you have a hard time explaining that option to clients as they come in?
I think most people like the idea of kind of having a greener, more natural ending. I haven't had as much people want to actually prepay it, but to have there definitely more people are asking about it and looking into it. When we talk about cremation, and I try to explain, cremation actually isn't green, even though you're not using up land. Sometimes people think that's a greener choice,
Yeah.
but the fact is that we live in the largest, land mass, second largest in the world. So we do have room in cemeteries for doing this greener section. And I'm hopeful the more people that choose it, the more cemeteries that will offer it. And so that our cemeteries can actually become a nice green place to be. We have some honeybees, we have, a whole bunch of people that can, or not people, but, wildlife that can really help grow this idea of just being more natural, more lovely. The green section in Picton I was just recently at, and it's in a forest, and it's just a beautiful spot that's just available for families just to walk through and just to enjoy nature as they're grieving their loved ones.
And I guess as your body is decomposing, it's creating nutrients for the surrounding vegetation and things like that as well.
That's right. So the idea is that we want to give back to the earth instead of taking from it. So definitely there's some sections that are wildflowers and not necessarily planting trees on the body, but trees nearby and bushes nearby. And it's just a lovely area to look out instead of looking out and seeing a whole bunch of stones and like freshly cut grass, which is still peaceful, very peaceful, but this is more of a culture that they're going to be adding to the community at whole.
When I think of a traditional cemetery and you've got all the stones and whatnot in these graves that have these caskets and bodies inside them, you can't really reuse that space.
Yeah, so this is kind of where, this is where it kind of came out from. In some countries, they do have to reuse the ground. So having a more natural burial helps that process to be more reusable, right? And so Canada right now, our laws is if you buy cemetery property, it's your property. It's your deed, eternal deed, as we call it, right? So right now we don't reuse cemeteries, but definitely the green sections have a possibility down the road to be reused in that way.
And what does the process look like in terms of, let's say somebody passes away within a certain period of time? I'm presuming that you have to have this done because of the deterioration of the body, the decomposing. So that creates a lot of smell and things like that too.
Yeah, so it's a very on my end of things in that we still are the people who come to where someone's passed away, take that person into our care. We still do all the government documents that have to do registering the death, registering the burial. We still have to know where we're bringing. So that's why that pre-planning comes in really important because we want to know what we're doing. It is a short amount of time. We have to get this done. So the more you plan ahead for this, the better. Almost say to do green, you have to plan. No kind of doing it at the moment because it's just a big rush of things to do. So if this is something that you're interested in, you do need to pre-plan it. But we do hold people in our care. We can do still a visitation. We can still do a ceremony. But yeah, it is a shorter amount of time. It just really depends on how the person passed away as well, what might be happening to the body naturally, because some things have already started in some people and some things haven't, right? So but we actually have a cold room storage on our facility, which is why we're a green funeral home. It's because we have location available for people to still have a visitation, to still have a service without having the embalming.
And that's the benefit of doing it through a place like yours, a funeral home such as yours, whereby, the body can be released it goes into, as you said, cold storage, which kind of preserves it a little bit so that the decomposition doesn't happen as quickly, I guess. And just correct
No,
me if
you're
I'm
right.
wrong in
You're
anything
good.
I'm saying here, right? And then that way you kind of get shrouded, put in for the visitation, everybody kind of sees. And I guess you can control the smell at that point as well. It's not as overpowering because it hasn't been decomposing for that long.
That's right. And then, like we had mentioned, you can use flowers. There's other ways we can kind of help naturally hide that smell. My mom had little lavender bags in the underwear drawers when she was growing up. Similar idea. Yeah,
Okay.
just make things
Yeah.
natural, right? As much as we can.
Right. Okay. And I'm presuming that from a cost standpoint, it's much more affordable as well because you don't have those expensive caskets and things like that to be looking at. Maybe we could talk about that a
Yeah.
little bit.
So just like everything that's green doesn't mean it's going to be cheap, right? So I would say you still need to
Right.
have to buy the cemetery property. So that's still the same cost as your cemetery property. They sell them at the same cost. And then the decision on having either a green casket or a wicker care with a shroud, those costs are more than, let's say, a cardboard casket that you're going to cremate. So we're not the cheapest option, but we're also not the most expensive option. But it definitely is a cost towards this, the cemetery being one of the costs, and then our fees as well for still, bringing the person into our care, doing all of the registration and arranging, and then whatever the person decides for how they're going to be placed into the ground.
When people get cremated, as an example, there's often wishes about where to spread the ashes and things like that. And so the family might take it and put it in their backyard, in their garden, or wherever, right? Or in the river or whatever. Is there any option? This is a crazy idea, but is there any option for natural burial? Let's say I really wanted to have this done by my favorite cherry tree in the backyard. Is that something that's an option?
Not right now. The legalities in Ontario is you do have to use a cemetery. So you do have to have a cemetery for any body burial. There are some
At least
in
here,
Ontario,
maybe in the States or maybe in other countries.
and actually other provinces. Some provinces you can bury on your own property. So it just depends on the legislation for the province that you live in and the country.
Okay. Any idea on what sort of cost one is talking about? Because that's always a question that people ask when they start looking at different options, right?
Yeah, so there's different types of cemeteries. Some are municipality run, some are privately run by corporations. The municipality run cemeteries are usually between, I say, $4,000 to $6,000 for one plot, depending on the location that you're going to. It could be less, it could be more, right? And then for funeral homes, our costs can vary, but we do have kind of vehicles that we still use, like I said, a funeral director to arrange it, and then the cost of the casket or the wicker carrier. So typically I'm telling people you want to plan for about $10,000 in total as a time. So we're about 5, 6, 7, depend if you do actually use a casket, we're a bit more, and then the cemetery. So you want to at least plan for 10,000 for both of us. And it can go up from there depending on, again, the funeral home you use, the location you use, and what casket you use.
Okay. So a cremation option isn't quite as much or it's about the same.
Cremation is less still, because like you said, you don't necessarily need to use the cemetery. So that cost could be nothing, right? So right away of that option, it's always going to be less. If you do decide to still cemetery with cremated remains, then that's where it can be similar.
Is there anything that I should be asking here that I haven't asked yet? I mean, you've dealt with this so much more.
I would say definitely, just like when we started talking about it a couple of weeks ago, it just intrigued your interest and you wanted to be more educated. That's where you start. You need to know that end of life planning begins now. You want to look into, do you have a will, power of attorney? Does your executor know your wishes? There's so many options at the funeral home that are available, and not all funeral homes offer the same thing. We've been a part of the Canada Burial Society, the Canadian Green Burial Society. Sorry, said that wrong. Since 2009, they have a website that shows funeral homes and cemeteries that are on that council. So you want to look into places that might offer what you want to do. It's always your choice. what you want to do for your end of life.
Yeah.
But the more you can plan ahead, the easier it is for your family. The last thing you want to leave a big mess. And I hear from kids all the time, adult children all the time, I wish they would have let me know what they wanted, because it would have made this a lot easier.
True, true. And a lot of this, the pre-planning takes care of it all so that the kids and the family, they don't have to worry about what are we going to do? How are we going to do it?
Exactly.
So your Smith Funeral Homes, you have locations in Burlington, Grimsby, and Stony Creek. Is
That's
that correct?
correct. But I think of myself as an educator. So anyone outside of our region just wants information or resource, I'm more than happy to help.
Where can they get a hold of you?
So I have a website, smithsfuneralhome.com, or smithsfh.com. And then my email is preplanning@smithsfh, as in funeralhome.com.
Fantastic. Listen, Sarah, thank you so much for appearing on our first episode, and I'll let you know as soon as it goes live. And good luck with all this stuff. It was just so enlightening to talk to you a few weeks ago about all this stuff, but especially more as you've elaborated on it today. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, take care. If you like this episode, then subscribe, share, and most importantly, register for upcoming notifications at SeniorOpedia.com.